Today we have our special guest, Ben. Thank you so much for coming. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Theo.
No problem. So I figured you could maybe just start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself and your story.
Uh, so, I'm from California. I started out there and have made myself quite the avid traveler, crossing the US several times. And in my journeys, I unfortunately met a woman in Connecticut who was very much distraught over her living situation and family situation. And I decided to help her. And out of all that, against my own wishes, we ended up having a daughter together who was great to have. And I separated from the mother immediately after childbirth. And she was out of my life for 4 wonderful years as I was living happily with my daughter throughout California. And then during a visit with grandma and grandpa in Connecticut, mother became aware of her being in the state and talked to the family and regained access to my daughter for about a week. I don't even think it was a week, and took that time to go into state services and claim that my daughter had been living there. Oh, and was born there. So from that
So
point,
let me just ask you, so at this time, had you guys ever gone to court to establish any custody or anything prior to that?
no, not at all. I just raised my daughter on my own, oblivious to the social norm of relying on court services to solidify a parent. I thought, I'm dad, this is my daughter. I've been raising her since birth. Mom disappeared, which I wanted, and was living back in Connecticut. And I thought that was the end of it. I never considered going in and filing for court custody or anything until it was 2013, end of 2013. And I'm sorry, end of 2014, I went into court services in Nevada because I'd gotten married at that point. My wife was very, very concerned about my daughter potentially getting stuck with a very dangerous mother. And during that time, when I went into courts had to be resolved first, which I thought lived there and
Wait, hold
couldn't
on.
have lived
I'm
there.
gonna and hold on one second because it just cut out. So you said during that time you went into court services and what happened?
They let me know that there had already been a filing done in the state of Connecticut at New Haven County Courthouse, and that I had to go to Connecticut to resolve that issue before they would be able to assist me in the state of Nevada.
So Nevada knew that the Connecticut filing was filed first.
They did. They said they could not file it when they were doing their UCCJEA clearance. They told me I because I'd only been there for 4 months, I had to wait another 2 months. And then they also notified me in that same meeting that there was already claim in another court jurisdiction asserting authority.
Okay, and I think that's really interesting because I've heard cases where uh, Connecticut basically took authority when other states had controlling jurisdiction, like California, for example. In one case I know of, they had controlling jurisdiction, and Connecticut skirted around the UCCJEA and started entering in orders and then never actually got that other state to relinquish. So,
Yeah, they've done
and yeah,
international ones as well. My cousin just went through that with a woman from Japan,
and
and
what
they could
happened?
not. She moved from Japan to Connecticut to regain custody, or at least as much as possible, and they wouldn't allow it. They determined her to be unfit, even though she has job, career path, the
Connecticut
works.
said she was unfit.
Correct.
So, I mean, it seems like you've had a lot of challenges kind of within the legal system. When you started going to Connecticut, what did you notice about the judicial system that was strange?
The first thing I noticed was that the judge assigned immediately had dislike towards me.
Was this Judge Emmons?
Essentially, yes, it is the former Judge Jane Emmons, and she was very brash and harsh towards me, and even was so upset that I didn't bring my daughter with me. She canceled that court appearance, ended the court date, and said that I had to return with the child and set another court date. I had to bring my 5-year-old daughter to court.
I have never heard of a
And
judge requiring a child to be there. And usually they'll kick people out if they have their kids and say kids aren't allowed. So that's just crazy that she would say that. And I've seen her do
yep,
some crazy stuff when I was there in 2016.
yes. And my attorney was mortified. And then when I did return with my daughter, per my attorney's advice, I was instructed not to bring her into the courthouse. No one ever does that, and it's not an appropriate place for a child to be. And just minutes into the court hearing, former Judge Jane Emmons said, "Where is the daughter? Where is the girl?" "She's not here, Your Honor. I advised my client not to bring her," said my attorney Lee at the time, who's now deceased. And she again stopped court proceedings and said that the child had to be brought there. And I had to explain I had the only vehicle. I would have to go pick her up, which she ordered me to do.
I think it's fair to say that you've experienced and witnessed your fair share of corruption in the Connecticut judicial system. And I was wondering if we could kind of break it down into the different ways that the system is corrupt. I know that you mentioned that the attorneys play a role. So how do the attorneys help to further the corruption in Connecticut?
Well, it's easy on that aspect. They will spend their time amongst each other coordinating how to lengthen out what would be quick agreements outside of court settlement and push them into the courtroom to inflate their earnings and their revenues associated with representation. And then when it comes down to court, if there is one party that's a clear favorite over the other, they will prevent an agreement from being ruled upon by the judge and they will push for settlement. And that settlement, if it is not a quality one like the ones I've been entered into, then you end up back in court again in a cyclical process that takes money, time, and if it starts again going the way of one party or the other that they're not wanting, like in my case, I don't live in Connecticut. So they do not want my daughter living with me in Florida because they'll lose all control over their narrative. And they have interjected new parties. So when the court sees that it's losing control, they'll say they have to get in professional experts, which now in my case has gone and extrapolated into requiring psychiatric observation of not just my daughter, but of myself and her interaction with me, which has, I've already gone through supervised visitation, and the woman in charge of that saw the way my daughter and I acted together. And instead of it being months and months and months of observation, she had it changed to 6 weeks back to back to back consecutively just to get it over with. And she told me on my first meeting, with a drug test in front of me. You don't use drugs. I'm not even going to waste my time on this. I feel like the mother should be the one drug tested.
It's interesting because you did bring up former Judge Jane Emmons before, and I just wanted to bring that up because, like I said, I did have a few hearings where she presided and she was wildly inappropriate. She basically, you know, I know you said she demanded that you bring your daughter to court when she was 5 years old and handed her over to the ex. And in my case, my ex got angry with family relations and left. And when they called our case and I told Judge Emmons that he got upset and left, she demanded that the clerk call him and order him to come back and like basically threatened him. And so she was always crazy and I remember seeing signs on I-91, big billboards demanding that she be removed. And what's interesting is they never removed her. She was never removed from the bench. And from what I understand, she was just not reconfirmed as a judge. And then she went to go work at Cohen and Wolf as an attorney, where she still works today. Is that right?
She is a lead advisor there. She's not actually working as an attorney. She has been put into the position where it's comparable to a real estate consultant. You can be a real estate consultant if you've lost your real estate license because you're not acting in a professional manner. It's like a counselor or a
But
therapist.
she's never lost
She is
her
an
license.
advisor.
She's never lost
She
her
didn't
bar
lose her
license.
license, but everybody in the state knows that if she were to be in the courtroom, it would not go well for anyone involved. So she's kept behind the scenes and essentially entertained to keep quiet about the systemic corruption.
And so do you think
She
that it creates a conflict of interest when a judge who, for example, presided over so many people's cases like yours, do you think it creates a conflict of interest where she then goes to work at one of the major firms that covers litigants who are her former um people that
victims.
appeared in front of her, like you?
Absolutely. And I had retained Cohen and Wolf with a Ariel Walker representing me through them. And I'd spoke with her and she did well. Mind you, I had to put some serious pressure on her. And then Jocelyn Horwitz, I believe that's her name, got involved as her advisor. And she would interject herself into meetings and calls with me and tried billing me for this time. And I said, no, you're not my attorney. I'm not going to pay you. And you're not giving me any advice that I need. You're helping your attorney. So you're educating her, and I'm not going to pay for that. And then she decided she'd work for free to help manage my case so well. Yet once she did begin having more interactions, I realized everything that she was telling me had nothing to do with my case. It had to do with other cases in other areas of the state where the information was not relevant or current to New Haven County. So I was being misrepresented by someone I didn't even retain. And then I started thinking more about it, and I even brought it up with my attorney. I'm like, why don't you review this with Emmons and see what we can do to get everything undone that she did erroneously? I brought up UCCJEA violations, and it became, oh, do you have proof of that? And I'm like, yeah, I have proof of that. And it's an obvious fact that my daughter never lived in Connecticut and wasn't born there. They all believed that my daughter was born in Connecticut. She was born in California. That's what her birth certificate says. Just because her mentally ill mother wrote down on court paperwork that she was born there doesn't make it true. And it's on the duty of the court to validate fact from
And
fiction, which they did not ever do.
Do you find that many of the attorneys are afraid to go against the judges? Like, for example, when you tell the attorney, like, this judge was biased, this judge lied, or this GAL was biased or lied, how many times will the attorneys file a motion to recuse or a motion to remove? Or will they say, well, we have a working relationship, so I'm not going to say anything?
They do use the working relationship, but I also have noted them more uncomfortable with the administrative case flow managers because they have all the power in assigning when somebody has a court date. So if they share their schedule, their vacation schedule with the court clerk in association with other cases that they have, and I don't know of any attorney that has just one case in court, they all have more than one. So um, what's happened is that it's not the judge retaliating so much, it's the case flow court clerk that is retaliating by assigning them court dates when they have vacation scheduled and disrupting their family plans. That is their biggest fear because there is no recourse to that. The court clerk manages the court clerk. That is their duty, their function, their administrative task. And there's no recourse for punishing them for giving someone a court date. Now, mind you, they're doing it in retaliation for behaviors of a attorney. If an attorney is fighting harder for one client more so than another, or is in a high conflict case like myself, they'll have other cases go awry because of scheduling. So that's the retaliation, that their family lives are going to be affected. It's not so much the judge retaliating on them, and I'm sure that many of the judges do and do rule unfairly, but the first concern that they have is that their daily life is going to be affected, and or their ability to represent any clients. Because the last thing I heard in court on the 5th, when I was supposed to be in court, which I didn't get to do, they canceled my court date, was that the judge had no control over scheduling. The court clerk is the one in charge of that. And when the schedule is set, the schedule is set. How mine became undone, I'm going to have to seek out more answers for that and
It
more clarity.
sounds like a lot of ex parte communications going on between lawyers and clerks and judges behind the scenes.
Absolutely that. And it may also even go further than that. And attorneys may be calling clients that are former clients that they no longer represent and encouraging them to file unnecessary frivolous motions. For example, Miss Hanson, the mother of my daughter, filed a motion for court appearance, and it just happened to be scheduled for September 5th, the same day as our court case had been scheduled since at least June of this year. And instead of my case getting heard, her case was heard where she had no attorney representing her. She was requesting the court to rule that the children's school be changed from Branford to Seymour because it was hard for her to drive there 3 times a week and get them to school on time. And the seating judge said, as he's reading through all this, covered what the court's duties are. The court does not assign where children go to school. They assign the children to the most fit parent to make that decision.
Yeah, and then how do they determine who's the most fit? It's it's like throwing darts at a wall and seeing what sticks, or whoever pays them the most money.
That I could not argue with at all. I can only agree with that unless it's a case like mine or a case like my cousin just went through, where the child has been claimed as ward by the state of Connecticut, rightfully or not, usually not, and they do not want to lose the revenues generated from keeping the child there. For example, my daughter, we're on our ninth year of court now, and more state resources are being utilized to manage my daughter, manage her mental health care now. She went from being a very happy, healthy child to now distraught from communications that her mother is giving to her via text or in person. And it's created mental health issues with her. And the state can say at the end of the day that they care, but what they really care about is being the entity that manages all of this because they get benefits from it, from health workers getting paid. The health workers spend their money in the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, and
It's
I think
just,
big organizations like Yale, Harvard Healthcare, they really have their teeth in the system deep.
of
And,
course.
like we said, there's no oversight. The Attorney General's office, the, you know, the Judicial Review Committee, the Grievance Committee, they're all buddies. And
Oh yeah, like
we are gonna we only have a couple minutes left. So I just want to end with if if you could give other parents one closing piece of advice, anyone going through divorce, custody in the system, what would you tell other parents struggling with this corruption in Connecticut?
at this point in time and day, you have to hire a professional witness to observe and record all court proceedings and heavily rely on documentation that cannot be argued. Because if it's a conversation and you're repeating what was said or what you heard, it is just that hearsay.
And would you recommend that they bring their own form of transcription to compare to the court's form, that the court sometimes manipulates the audio and transcripts?
Oh, they definitely do manipulate the audio and transcripts. Since
I've noticed that
2015, they've
too.
done it, especially when the guardian ad litem admonished that she had been having meetings outside of court hours with the court clerk and the judge that wasn't even presiding over my case. Well, that transcript was edited to remove the judge's name and gender identity, but the continuity of it and context was still left there, unfortunately for her. And that judge involved is no longer in New Haven. Miss Grossman, for whatever circumstance or reason, has been removed from the New Haven Judicial District.